Welcome. This is a pre-recorded episode of Regional Wrap from June the 8th. It's episode 51 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, the Reddicliffe Highway, a linchpin for far north Queensland transport, is my guest Ken Harley. Ken is the chairman of the steering committee for the Kuranda Range Bypass, which is now commonly referred to as the Reddicliffe Highway, after Ron Reddicliffe, who first designed the alternative route in the 1960s. Welcome, Ken.
G'day, Bill.
How are you going?
Damn good, mate. It's a lovely warm night in Mareeba.
Well, it's a lot better than what it is in Victoria and southeast Queensland. Although they do tell us a bit of a chill's coming our way over the next couple of days, but I'll believe that when I feel it.
Yes, matey. I've got family in Cobargo in southern New South Wales, and it's on for young and old there.
Before we get into the episode about the Reddicliffe Highway or the Kuranda Range Bypass, can you give us a bit of information about yourself, your exploits as a young man, the mischief you got up to, and your work history and your efforts in the community? Because I know you're a stalwart in the Mareeba community and been involved in a lot of community activities.
Yeah, Bill. So I was born at a beautiful little country town called Dungog in New South Wales. It was a dairy farming and timber town. And I watched it as I grew up. It grew into decline with the decline of the dairy industry and the timber industry. And so we were luckily relocated by my mum and dad to Wollongong in New South Wales, which was just a massive growth boom town. In Dungog, we were in beef raising, we were in dairy farming and sawmilling. But my main form of recreation and what have you with my mother and father was to be roaming around the forests of the Barrington Tops, right over the Mile Lakes area, Seal Rocks, and the Chichester State Forest. That's where I thought the world started and ended, actually, when I was very small. So we moved to Wollongong, and I learned a lot of lessons in Wollongong. It was a boom town. They couldn't build houses fast enough. Immigrants with their families were housed in hostels in not so good conditions. For the steel industry and the coal industry. And I saw houses and villages turn into big towns, but I saw something that I didn't understand then, and that was a lot of vacant land that was in amongst the suburbs and what have you. And what I didn't understand then when I was young was that was the planners who were setting aside the land for where now are expressways and shopping centres and hospitals and other, sewage plants and other services. And these fellas were 30 years before in a massive boom, and you couldn't build houses fast enough, and yet they planned and they set aside land, which was probably a pretty fair feat in itself. I then finished school and I worked in small business for a while, and then I went to WWII, worked for Comalco in lots of capacities there. You had magnificent opportunities in the 70s. Comalco WWII was another place where it just couldn't boom fast enough. But you just finished building the extension on the powerhouse for a new diesel generator, and there'd be a need for another one. That's how fast it boomed in my time there. But we gained tremendous experience, and we also roamed the wilds of Cape York. So it was a bit of a fairy tale existence. And then I went back to coal mining, underground in the old-fashioned board and pillar system of coal mining, which goes way, way back. It was, if anything, it was a lesson in the industry in the Illawarra. Losing a man a day was nothing. A death a day in the steel industry and the coal industry was just accepted. And I saw the changes after the Appin mine disaster, where suddenly the management became responsible for the men underground and what have you, and some of those fellas went to court and what have you. So it radically changed the industry, but I saw the terrible, terrible side of it. And as an aside, when I was in Wollongong, I also saw what we are seeing unfold in our hospitals in Queensland, where there were days, Bill, when we would be advised that our mine or our business, our manufacturing or the steel industry, section of the steel industry would be closed down. And that was because there was no guarantee to be able to deal with major industries in the Wollongong and Port Kembla hospitals. You know, it's just amazing that they closed industry. They closed whole coal mines for 24 hours and they went on a roster system because the hospitals couldn't guarantee the treatment of the injured men. So that was something that really rocked me and stuck with me all my time. Then I came back here to finish my life off in Kuranda and around Mareeba and here in North Queensland. I love the place to death. And so I've seen a fair bit of change since my first times here when I fell in love with it in 1973.
I've only moved here in about 2012, and there's been an ongoing discussion, I'd call it, in regards to the Kuranda Range. But if you get to know people like Bill Cummings and that, you can actually go and search his archives and you find plans and discussions and that going back to the 90s for a replacement road. So it's something that's been ongoing for a long time, and it's really come to a head, and it's sad that these things aren't planned. Like you were saying before, in Wollongong, they had a plan. There was all this vacant land for things to come up in the future, but there doesn't seem to have ever been any plan for really improving the connectivity between Cairns and the Tableland and up to the Cape.
Yeah, there's a very good, well, not a very good reason, there's a disastrous reason for it, Bill, and that was that in 1966, Martin Tenney took the Reddicliffe Highway proposal to Parliament in Brisbane. That was after Mr. Reddicliffe had sort of found the road that he already, all the old tin miners. See, where the Reddicliffe Highway goes is part of the old Mareeba gold and mineral field. And so these guys walked and prospected and mined all over it. And then later on, some of them logged it. So Martin Tenney took the proposal to Brisbane, and the decision was from the demographers in Brisbane, and this will rock you to your boots, but that the Mulgrave Shire, the old Mulgrave Shire, which surrounded the Cairns city and went from Palm Cove down to just north of Innisfail and back to the foothills, that their decision was in the 60s that it would decline in population because of mechanisation in the cane industry, and that Cairns would remain dormant. There were no ears open for an international airport or a tourist industry or anything like that. That just wasn't on the horizon. So that meant that there was no planning. So that's why in Cairns we struggle, you know, with this giant struggle now with Cairns for water, for domestic consumption. That's why we struggle for roads. That's why we struggle to get a bypass around Cairns for the highway. That's why we, up here in the Tablelands, we struggle for enough water for the farmers and what have you. It goes back to that terrible, terrible decision that was taken in Brisbane in about 1966.
I think their plan was for us to wither away.
Yeah, probably, mate. I don't know. I just, my dealings with this start, I led a group that worked very hard to get a magnificent high school built in Kuranda, to obtain the land and get a magnificent high school built here. And part of that, we got intertwined with the Kuranda Range Road because there was a danger to our kids who were getting bused down to Smithy, mostly to Smithfield every day. And there were incidents and a couple of hits on the buses as they took our kids down or brought them up. And so we sort of, as a group lobbying for the high school, we were very much had that in the back of our minds. And then I was also part of an active and very successful residents and ratepayers group And we had some very serious incidents and accidents with people on the Kuranda, our own people from Kuranda on the Range Road. That culminated with a lady who went over the side and disappeared for many, many hours. She didn't turn up at work, but she'd left home. And so this search started for her, and she was found way, way down over the side and seriously injured. That really triggered the Kuranda community through their Ratepayers Association to start to talk to main roads, to try and get, we didn't have guardrails in those days built. So this was to try and get guardrails built, to look at the road surface, to look at the drainage, to look at guideposts and signage and what have you, to try and enhance the safety of the road. Now that went along quite nicely. There was a very receptive, communicative main roads in those days. And so we were able to work with them and experiment and muck around and get information to main roads from our road users. And so then
in those days, was the main roads people you dealt with more localised?
Not really, Bill. Bit of both, but they were different. You could pick up if you're on the committee that communicated with them, if you had something serious or urgent to talk about, you could pick up the phone and talk to them. You not emails and wait for phone calls back. And I don't want to get into that, but it's just it was different, and it was to their, the senior people in main roads used to comment, gee, those truck drivers and bus drivers know what they're talking about. We didn't take whatever it was into account when we thought about them traversing the road. So it was good. Then in about 96, there were some senior engineers and planners in Mareeba Shire who, once again, times changed, but back in those days they were involved, they cared, they were trying, and they wanted to listen. Far cry from today. But we were able to convene a couple of sessions in Mareeba, in the Shire Council there, and out came this dusted off Reddicliffe Highway plan, the Reddicliffe Road plan, that the senior engineer still held a copy of. And that was a game changer when we went through those sessions with them, because we realised then that the current Kuranda route wasn't going to cut the cake in the future, and that we just couldn't keep pushing to get the thing. We could keep pushing to get it safer, but we couldn't push it to the idea that we're going to get bigger trucks or what have you, or more traffic on the road. And we very convinced then, after listening to those people who really knew what they were talking about, that we had to go and find another road. And they showed us many alternatives, many alternatives that they had there, but they kept on, the Reddicliffe route kept on bubbling to the top. And so then when as part of community liaison, we were involved in all these studies, just study after study. If I might be wrong, but I'm certainly not on 27 studies that I can remember. And it's no less, and it might be more, but 27 studies on the Kuranda route, and endless, trying to, as some people say, flog a dead horse and put band-aids on a dead horse. So then, of course, times changed, the ability to negotiate changed and communicate changed, but along came FNROC, and that's the Far North Queensland Regional Organisation of Councils, and they are to be congratulated. They spent a lot of money, but with good intent, no political persuasion or pressures to produce a study that said this or said that. It was to open and get the bare facts, and along that came. And part of that was the unearthing of a main roads report, which said that in 2005, that the Range Road would experience unacceptable loads of traffic. 2005, Bill. And then of course you go through that FNROC, Far North Queensland Regional Organisations of Council report, and you find the road capacity being upgraded. Someone gets a white out pen out and scratches out one figure and puts another one in, and you find the traffic counts rising in excess of it. So the last of it, that in 2019 is the last time you can take a realistic measurement of the traffic flow on the Kuranda Range Road or the Kuranda route, because then the GFC, then virus, and then of course the bloody Barron Bridge all play their part in affecting traffic counts. And so 2019, we're regularly exceeding 10,000 cars a day, 10,000 vehicles per day, vehicles per day, of which 1,000 were heavy transports, 1,000 heavy transport movements per day. Now we know, or we can be sure, that if since 2004 to 2019, that's 15 years, the heavy transports grew by an average of 4% every year. So we could actually get a bit of a steer that if the Barron Bridge was functional, we could have a pretty good idea of how many transports would be using it today. But 1,000 vehicles, heavy transport vehicles per day were using that road then, way beyond its capacity, way beyond its design.
Before we move to the Reddicliffe Highway and alternative routes, I think it's pretty interesting in regards to talk about the Kuranda Range Road's history in the first place. My understanding that was originally a bullock's track up to the range, and we had the Gillies Highway in 1930, I think it was in the 26 or something, was built. The Palmerston Road had been there, basically a lot longer than that. So basically, the Kuranda Range crossing from basically Smithfield up towards Mareeba and Kuranda was actually originally a bullock's track, and it was only in World War II as a result of the Defence Department's need to establish bases closer to the action. They put efforts into building a airfield, or two airfields up near Mareeba. One was a fighter strip, one was a bomber strip. We also, at Atherton, we had a hospital established there so it could treat casualties. And there was a need to access the tablelands a lot better. So in 1942, I think it was called Defence Road No. 47, was built. And that was the precursor of the Kuranda Range Road as we know it. And obviously it's been upgraded over the years. But there's also, my understanding is there's a lot of geological problems with that road in regards to, because it hugs the side of the hills, a lot of the roadways actually had to be underpinned to secure it. And so while a lot of people talk about, oh, well, we'll just upgrade the road and widen it and whatever, that won't do in regards to heavy vehicles and long-term safety and security of that network. So I think most people come to the conclusion, or should come to the conclusion, that you need another way across. And now I've only been here since 2012, and I have heard of about at least 6 variations on the same theme of how to get from a better connection from Cairns to Mareeba.
Yeah, Bill, just in connection with the airfields, there was even an airfield at Kuranda. The remains of it are up on Black Mountain Road, slightly to the north of Kuranda, in behind Saddle Mountain, actually. So, yeah, you're right about the road. The gentleman that had to push that road up, remember that when they started to do that road, there was no mechanisation. So everything was done basically by hand. And then along came the Americans and went, hang on, we'll put a bulldozer on this. So they luckily found a bulldozer. They were in scarce supply, of course, in those days. And so then a group of guys got together and got to use the thing properly and worked. They were all bushies, bullickies and stuff like that. And they poked their way up over the hill, but they just cut into the side and pushed over enough to get them a wide enough track. And then as the years have gone by, it's just become wider and wider. And yeah, you're right. It follows all the contours in and out of all the gullies with all those bends. On one spot, it even goes downhill, you're climbing, and on it goes. You can't take it away from it. It was an amazing feat for them in their day to get that thing up and over there the way they did. Before that, there were vehicles traversing, sort of like where the bike track is now, over the side of the lookout. And you can find remnants of another road above the lookout, and takes up to the saddle. In fact, some of the old bitumen is still there. So there's been lots of fiddles with it, but it's never ever meant to do the job it's done today. So where it fails today is what's called the Kuranda route compared to any other way. And that is that the planners and all the people that are freight industry and what have you that are all involved in this all say that you must be ready to build a motorway of the future. You must be ready to try and put a road or a motorway from its collector point, which in our case is here east of Mareeba somewhere, so that in the future a road will feed onto it from up on the Tablelands from Atherton. Another road will feed from the Mareeba Plains and then west to Chillagoe and west to the Gulf. And yet another road will come down, an improvement on the existing Kennedy Highway, probably at Baibura, and it'll swing on to the Reddicliffe or whatever you're going to build. But there's got to be a collector point, and you've got to think about your future growth of your population, your housing and all your services, and try and get that collector point identified and the avenues of the roads of the future that go onto it. Then you've got to try and build a road which will not burn enormous amounts of diesel, not scrub enormous amounts of rubber like the Kuranda Range Road does now, and which will be as efficient as possible as far as time and speed goes. So you've got to build a straight road with no intersections, no private property entrances and departures on it, just a plain straight motorway. And you've got to take it down and get it as far as you can into the city, as close as possible to the port, to the CBD, to the hospital and medical area that's evolving in Cairns, and then out to the Cairns airport. And you've got to be able to connect with existing and future roadways to that effect, that connect with those things. And most importantly, the produce from the food bowl of the Mareeba Plains, the Atherton Tablelands and up in Cape York, because when you and I are gone, it'll be a massive food bowl for sure. The food bowl has got to be the transport from the food bowl, and that's the B doubles, that's what the world runs on now. They've got to be able to get from Mareeba to Cairns and onto the Bruce, down on the flats, down south of Gordonvale, very quickly, with a minimum of fuel burn or, you know, battery burn or whatever it's going to be when the time comes, and on their way south. So when you put all that together, it sounds very complicated till you get into a hot air balloon, till you, like me, be a pretty fair bushwalker and walk a lot of it, like Ron Reddicliffe and what have you, and then you can see, if you get in that hot air balloon and look to the east, you can see where the Reddicliffe would go. And it goes down into Cairns and connects up with existing and the future Cairns bypass road and all those things. So the Kuranda route has you know, is no longer fit for purpose. You burn enormous amounts of fuel, you cost a lot of money. Even if you didn't have delays, you're costing a lot of money, you're burning a lot of fuel, you are still dissecting the narrowest part of the wet tropics or the World Heritage Strip. It is extremely narrow there, and here's this road going up through it, and it sort of cuts it twice because you get onto it at Smithfield and you start climbing, you go over near Caravonica, and then you do the big bend there where everybody does their 360s, and then you head up past the lookout and up over the saddle at Saddle Mountain. But when you've done that, you're still not over. The freight trucks are in engine brake and trying to hold back as they go down the hill to Screets Creek, then they pull again, they get over the Barron Bridge, and then they pull again uphill and down Dale all the way to Speewah. So the Kuranda route in general just won't cut the cake in the future. And as for what propelled me into this, As for safety, you know, you can't make the thing carry the loads it's supposed to carry and the loads of the future and still be travelling safely. People can blame speed, people can blame road surface, trees overhanging, trucks, other motorists that are in that don't have much consideration for everybody else. But when you put all that in the pot, it just means it's not safe, nor is it efficient, nor is it environmentally acceptable. The cassowaries can't run fast enough now. So why would you want the cassowaries to run faster with 4 lanes or 3 lanes in the future? We've got to bite the bullet and we've got to spend some money to develop a road, a motorway with absolute environmental excellence. It's a magnificent opportunity for us if we've got the money to develop a road of environmental excellence to get up and over to the Closey River from Cairns, and then it's a dead straight flat road, follows the 420 contour and is dead straight all the way. Well, eventually it can go all the way to Baibura in one straight line, but at the moment we're lobbying for from Davies Creek. So the difference in the from Post Office Cairns to Post Office Mareeba, the existing Kuranda route is 62.6 kilometres long. The Reddicliffe is 41.5, but the Reddicliffe has it all over the Kuranda route because of the grades, not and the more satisfactory grades for freight and for cars, and the straight lines, and no private driveways, no other intersections.
I think one thing that sort of stands out to me is the efforts of Toowoomba in regards to their connector.
Yep.
Now, actually, they're a pack of cheats. They're actually now got a second motorway, a second connector as well for their bypass. So they're done pretty well. But the emphasis on getting that up and running was the economic improvement to the area and
Yep.
Enhancing productivity. There's a lot of agriculture out there, getting stuff to Brisbane, better freight lines. So as well as the safety factor and the sort of passenger car type, the real driving factor was to help open up the area for future economic development. And let's face it, and the other thing that they've got going for them is the Wagners. Like, we could do it with a couple of Wagners up here, we'd probably be a long way ahead. But that company has really driven Toowoomba to the forefront in regards to access and motor access and sort of economic growth, and that's really what this new roadway is needed to do, is actually become a connector that opens up better connection, not only just for the Tablelands, but for the Cape as well, because the Cape has plenty of potential, as does the whole far north Queensland. But to unlock that potential, you've got to have infrastructure.
That's right. In fact, not so very long ago, we're explaining to Barnaby Joyce here in Mareeba the connection from the Kuranda Range Road in lots of industry and most industry and most people transport going for medical or shopping or schooling or jobs or what have you. You draw a line from Cairns out to Curumba, and then you include all Cape York. And as the Peninsula Development Road continues its way to Bamaga in a highly developed way, there will be a service on the Kuranda route to the Torres Straits, because the trucks will truck all the way to Bamaga before they go to barge freight out to the particular islands. So looking off into the future, not very far away, but you and I mightn't see it, but you know, the load on the road economically is certainly going to be a lot more than it is today. And when you then consider that Cairns is in strife with housing, with space for housing, space for development, space for growth, and then you think, well, if you're only 27 minutes from Mareeba, there's enough traffic now going from the Mareeba Way, from Atherton, Mount Malloy and everywhere, coming down here and going to Cairns every day for a job, for their work. But then it enables people to come here and buy cheaper land and what have you, and get a start and still work or educate or have their kids educated or do their medicals in Cairns, because it'll only be just down the road. And then as for the trucks, Bill, to give you some indication, the freight industry are heavily involved in talking with us and working with us. And they tell us that their estimation is that when the Reddicliffe finally gets to Cairns and then there's more work done on those intersections and things in the Cairns bypass of the future, a B-double truck will leave the museum here at Mareeba from that corner there, and two of them will head off on the Reddicliffe and one will head by the Palmerston. By the time the B-double that went by the Palmerston is between Malandra and Miller, the one that went via the Reddicliffe will be going through Innisfail. So that's dollars, Bill. That's dollars. That's reducing freight rate and what have you. And that's taken the load off the Palmerston. And also the trucks aren't there trying to climb, burn energy or descend on the Palmerston. So, money-wise, Mr. Cummings has done an initial cost-benefit analysis, initial financial analysis of the Reddicliffe. And he says that it holds water compared to many other similar highways or motorways that have been built in Australia. And the most important consideration he did a study on time saving for people and freight and on costs like fuel costs and things. The most important one is the safety one, but that is a study which is enormous and you'd have to finance someone to do that, the safety savings. The Kuranda route has, at 2019, 2.5 times the hospitalisation from accidents of any other federal road in Australia. That tells you all you need to know.
You would have been surprised then, like most of the people in Cairns, with the report that was done last year in 21, but released in January this year. And I'll just show a quick screenshot.
Yeah.
This is the Cairns to Northern Tablelands Access Strategy. And that was commissioned by the state government. And released, and it's got here on page 4. This is mind you, in I think it was about 2019 or before that, we tried to have a tourist development up near Kuranda called Kerwell, and they basically said that you couldn't have that new facility or tourist facility because unless they upgraded the road, and they were trying to force Kerwell to actually fund the upgrade of the Kuranda Range. And then, so they're basically saying you can't handle any more new growth. And then this report comes out early this year, released in January. I think it was about the last weekend in January. And in the first overview, you got transport modelling, identified major infrastructure upgrades and new alignments are not required in the short to medium term. And then when you go to page 64, it basically says they're going to look at it in 2051. That's when you'll need to look at it. So when you get that sort of double talk in 2019, the road wasn't good enough for a new tourist facility. Yet in 2021, they said it's fine until 2051. What do you make of that as far as the state government's attitude?
Bill, it was nothing but an insult to us all to think that we were going to swallow that. Why then is Mareeba one of the fastest growing towns outside our capital cities in Queensland? Why are those trucks increasing at an average of 4% every year, year on year on year? Why is the traffic increasing on the Kuranda route to past 10,000 per day on some days? Where are all these people going? Why are all these houses getting built around Mareeba, Atherton, Kuranda? What's all this? How do all these people travel? You know, a few more cars from Curl World wasn't going to make much difference to what the growth and what is already happening. It was just an insult to most everybody that even remotely knows about the traffic on the Kuranda route. And so it did nothing but get people's backs up. It did nothing but make people angry, and it did nothing but see what a waste of $1.6 million.
But then you had our local members, our representatives who's supposed to go down to Brisbane and fight for us. They come up with saying, oh, the report's fine. And then what we can do is we can have a quick crash response team that can go and clear the road. I presume you go up there and just push the cars over the side, or we can have controlled traffic lights to control the flow. Now, that seems to be the wrong attitude for people who are supposed to be representing us and our needs to have when they defend something that comes out of Brisbane rather than sort of fight for what we need.
I think one of the most I've been involved in negotiating and part of acting to try and get all sorts of community facilities and improvements made for as long as I can remember. It sort of runs in our family. But mate, the big thing that's changed and the thing that makes it so harder, and they wonder why people aren't involved in their community as much anymore, is this closed door policy, and we know better, and we don't have to consult with the community, and we don't have to talk to them, and they have these consultants do this pseudo public consultation before they produce some sort of a report. That's what's changed and made it harder, is that way of doing business, or so-called doing business. And so people with common sense, people with experience, people like us who are able to harness a whole heap of experts from Europe and all over Australia for the Reddicliffe, we're able to harness their knowledge and their experience and their advice, and we can do it, but we are not listened to, and it's a real shame. It's just that this state government just doesn't matter what you try and talk to them about, it's a stone wall, and that's really shameful. It upsets me enormously that you can't knock on a door and get an appointment to go and talk about something. So yeah, there's whole heap of things, mate. That ready response unit, I mean, I don't know, well, I just can't work out where that came from. When the road, except say now tonight, if there's an incident, yes, there'll be, in an hour, there'll be 150, 200 cars jammed up on the Cairns side, and there'll be 80 to 100 on the Mareeba side. But in the day, it's thousands of cars. How does any ready response unit get up there any faster than what they're doing now? Then you've got in major incidents, you've got the poor old copper there doing his, the scientific branch, the forensic branch are there. They can't go any faster. They've got to investigate properly and correctly. Then you've got to wait for the environmental people to come and check the trees and what have you, and make sure there's nothing endangered in the trees before it gets chopped up. You've got to try and get the backhoes and ambulances up there. People queue up on the, let's just picture all the cars queued on the upside. very quickly, you definitely don't go to the state government advice site on the highway blockage. On the Kuranda place, you go to a Facebook page that everyone's called Kuranda Range Updates, and you'll get, from minutes after some incident happens, you'll get the message, and you'll be able to talk amongst each other and say, well, we better go back to Smithfield and get ourselves embedded down at KFC, at Macca's, or in the shopping centre there or somewhere. And so when the emergency vehicles and working vehicles and tow trucks are trying to come up, people are trying to chuck a Yui from where they're jammed in the conga line to go back down. And all this sort of stuff goes on. And so, yeah, that ready response unit, that was, I don't know where that come from. Someone must play with Matchbox toys or something. But, you know.
But don't you think you would have to be pretty bold-faced to stand up there in Cairns and speak to your constituents and say, oh, you know, this is what we'll do. You know, to me, I don't think I could keep a straight face and come up with that story.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't. I watched that over and over and over again. I watched it over and over again the day that they were going to control the trucks, and you know, if the trucks can't control themselves, they're going to control the trucks, and if the trucks might have to get off, or some of them might have to get off the road, you know. I watched all that and I thought, gee, but then, Bill, I then can't sleep at night thinking about the juvenile crime, and these people just stand there like nothing is wrong. Nothing is wrong. And here in Mareeba, we've got one of the highest crime rates there are per head of population. And they just don't want to talk to you about it, and everything's hunky-dory, and it's all good. And
no, it's fine for us to be the perpetual victims of crime because they don't want to fix it. But moving back to some of the suggestions that have been put in place over the years in regards to different ways to get across the Kuranda Range. Do you think some of those proposals haven't really looked critically enough at the criteria and requirements, what a connector between the Cairns port and Tablelands and onto the Cape require? When you did looked at Reddicliffe, did you have a set of requirements or criteria that you sort of, well, this is the requirements of industry, this is the requirements of the community? Well, how do we make sure we meet those requirements, that we can actually get a road that's double Bs and heavy equipment, dangerous goods? Because, I mean, it's no good having a road if it's got a lot of restrictions on it. We want a road that can carry all, you know, I don't care, 2 Abraham tanks on low loaders up there because of a military requirement. I want fully laden petrol tankers to be able to go up there. I want dangerous chemicals, explosives or whatever to go up there for whatever roles that you may need. But there can't be any restrictions on a road that's supposed to give you economic development.
That's right. So you have your safety, your economics. Very importantly, in the case of what we're trying to do between Mareeba and Cairns, environment. That's probably overarching everything, really. So you have all those time, travel, and all that sort of stuff. You have all those in your wish list, and then you have to go and try and apply them and find out which one. You know, where can you go to satisfy all those things? A very important one is defence, and defence is, you know, there's got to be a connector, a fast, efficient and safe connector between Cairns, the Port of Cairns, and Sherga Base, and also to Darwin. So, you know, that, like you say, we've got a massive industry up here, but we can't carry a load of fertiliser in a tunnel, for example. And every load of general freight, Tuxworths and all those companies that cart general freight all out to the Gulf and all through the peninsula, You know, they've got outboard motors and all sorts of stuff on those trucks. And of course, some of that comes under dangerous goods. Well, like, regardless of what the so-called experts say, the rules and regulations and the real experts say you can't run them in a tunnel. But all of the plans, all of the things that have surfaced, they've got to pass, like you say, they must pass those tests. And you can't run a brand new road or a brand new route somewhere without connecting into existing or planned routes to keep it efficient into the future. So our grandkids aren't dealing with getting houses knocked down and all sorts of things to try and get something to connect up in the future. So you've got to in the basket, there's a whole heap of considerations that you've got to think about. And you've also got to think about, one day in the future, will the table and will the Gulf, will the peninsula need a rail again, an efficient rail again? You've got to sort of think about that again at this time, and have that in the back of your mind, that if in fact the planners and people say, yes, one day in the future we will need a fast passenger service and maybe our freight to get it up onto the tablelands, then hopefully this time round, if we can keep pushing the Reddicliffe proposal, land will be quarantined for that sort of thing. So yeah, there's a whole heap of things in the list that you've got to go through, and you've got to try and tick the boxes of as many of them as you can.
I think one of the other things, we talk about dangerous goods, but it's not just dangerous goods, it's over width, oversized, and heavy loads, super heavy loads that have got to be catered for too. If they don't cater for that, well then it's basically pointless. It's not going to be an economic connector and provide for our growth in the future. If it doesn't meet those requirements, then it's not worth having.
That's correct. Mate, it's a hard decision. It's a hard decision to make. I mean, in lots of ways, it's very simple. It's got to be done. Something's got to be done. That's very simple. It's easy. It's common sense. You don't need another consultant's report to decide it's got to be done. But then how you go about it and how you build it, yes, there's some hard yards. Yes, there's some things there that are really going to cost some big dollars. For example, as we descend around Jagool Peak, we would think, and all our engineering people would think, that there'll be two separate roads, 2 lanes here and 2 lanes somewhere else, is how we think that it'll probably be done. But that's not our decision, but that's the way we think about it. And that's mainly to minimise impact on the environment. But yes, they're difficult. Yes, there's going to be pain, but you've got to go and do it. And just picture, Bill, 10 or 12 years of construction on the existing Kuranda route. Think of the disruption and the dollars. You know, there's a little tiny exercise going on down there at the moment for $30 million to lay a cable underground up the Kuranda Range. I think they've got 1.5 kilometres so far in the first couple of months. That job can be done at a night time. But actually reconstructing a road and building big bridges, cantilevered bridges, or whatever you're going to do to try and sort out that Kuranda Hill, that's just 10 or 12 years of disruption. How much is that going to cost? How much has the failure of the Barron River Bridge at Kuranda cost, sending the trucks the long way because they can't take their tonnages across there and their wide loads? And guess who pays, Bill? We do.
One of the other things too is where the requirement for taking into account the environment, it becomes a little bit overshadowing the whole development of far north Queensland. And one of the things I fear now is the promise of Labor during the election was $210 million for the Kuranda Range. Didn't actually specify it, but it could be a problem if they go to spend sort of money and they get nothing out of it, or we get nothing good out of it other than maybe a few extra guardrails going up to the Kuranda Range and maybe a bit of straightening and a bit more width in it, so a bigger shoulder area. But that will be just like throwing $210 million in the bin, because it won't really give us any more economic value.
That's right. You won't get a return. You won't get a return on the money. You won't get a return. I doubt that for 200 million, you won't do much for 200 million, mate. If you think of, you factor in, you know, the difference in building a road in what us road builders call a greenfield site, which is no other traffic, no nothing. You're just putting a new road in somewhere. The cost difference between doing that and the cost of building on an existing place thing where you've got to maintain the traffic flow, it's a horrendous difference. So that 200 million, it won't get far, and it may solve some safety problems. It won't solve an environmental problem. It won't even look at that. The cassowary still won't be able to run fast enough. You know, it dumps you in Smithfield, and then you've got to make your way across to Cairns. Now, we saw the other day when the servo caught a light there, the old servo at the airport lights. We saw the havoc that caused. If you look out on the northern beaches, you see houses getting built on all those flats in the back of Trinity Park and all those places. You see that massive housing development still growing. So that means increased traffic on what's the Captain Cook that's there now. Then you have the other elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. You can ask all the questions you like, but no one wants to talk about it, and that's the Captain Cook Highway. You have massive growth in Port Douglas. There's another, as you approach Craiglee now, there's another giant subdivision going in there. Then look over towards the foothills where the cane used to grow as you drive towards Mossman. Go to Mossman, they've even got a Woolworths up there now. Have a look around Mossman at the growth. Have a look up around Malloy, because Malloy people, a lot of Gelatin people probably use the Rex, but they come down, they all funnel down through Smithfield. So are you, even with the changes that are going on in Smithfield now and the duplication of the Barron Bridge at Caravonica, that's not going to carry the load into the future. That's not an investment in the future. So fascinating, that one.
The other thing is too, with the environment and the wet tropics heritage area, a lot of people basically balk, oh, we can't do anything because it's World Heritage listed area. But that isn't actually true. There is nothing stopping a government from, if it's required for economic development or safety or whatever, or transport, to develop there. What they have to do to keep the listing is actually just put in a modification request in the usage of it. And if anyone looks at the wet tropics, the area is about 9,000 square metres, 9,000 square kilometres of area. Now, when Richardson signed off on that paper, I mean, I don't know if you've looked at that submission for World Heritage listing, but it was about I think it might have been an 80-page report. It was about 40 pages of photos of different birds, plants, and animals, and there was actually no map. All the information in regards to the area that's been set aside was just a series of survey information for different lots that interconnected that made up the area. But they included areas that had already been logged, areas that are already under pasture, and all those sort of things. It is quite a mess. And the thing is, there's nothing stopping the Commonwealth government, if it sees fit, to put in an amendment for modification to actually, if we want to build a bulldozer road right through the middle of it and just put a great big scar, there's actually nothing to stop us from doing putting in the request and just see what happens in regards to whether they take us off the listing or not. But of course, you wouldn't go to that sort of extent, but there's no reason we should be completely shying away or fearful of the fact you're going to do work in the wet tropics heritage area.
Yeah, I get very sick and tired of listening to people who go, oh, wet tropics, and throw their hands in the air and say, oh, well, they walk away from things. If you look at if you approach the wet tropics people and you get the correct information of all the hurdles that you've got to jump, and then you go away and you say to your engineers and your designers and your environmental people, well, now how can we do this and still comply? It's not a big number. It's not hard. It's more expensive in building a road than a road on the flat. But remember, we've got to go around a mountain range, so it's going to be expensive anyhow. But, you know, it's not impossible with the wet tropics. It's a matter of sitting down and talking, and it's a matter of going through brick by brick each of the regulations, and then getting the people's minds that are working with you to apply themselves is to, okay, as each one comes, okay, what can we do here? What can we do there? It's not impossible. And we should be able to, in Australia, we're still a clever country. It's one of the things we've got left. We've got to be clever enough to be able to do this Reddicliffe or whatever the question is.
You need clever and determined politicians, but we're pretty short. We're pretty short on those at the moment. Yeah, there's not many with intestinal fortitude to stand up to school children chanting something about climate change. So we haven't got much faith in. But the other thing is,
just an aside, Bill, with that, there's an amazing opportunity. Let's just say we take on the Reddicliffe, and then we have to design it, and we have to look at all the environmental, you know, even in some cases you've got to exceed what wet tropics or someone might need. It's only fair to try and do that. But what an opportunity for a young person in the environmental sciences area. What a magnificent opportunity. And then they can say to the rest of the world, wherever they want to go and work or whatever, well, I built that thing. I built that thing in Cairns, Australia, and it's a leader, and be measured by it. You know, it's a fantastic opportunity. And the other thing it is if we handle it correctly, if we can just handle it correctly, we can have the community input and the pressure created by the community to make sure that government do make the correct decisions and apply the correct amount of money. Because remember, you haven't just got to design this thing and build it, you've got to maintain it as well.
The other thing that gets me is communities have to drive these things. I think that's a complete cop-out for governments. I mean, in this day and age, after COVID especially, one thing we have to do is grow the pie. If the governments don't get out there and grow the pie, right, we're just going to be stuck with debt forever. So these are the sort of projects that can grow the pie. Yeah. And really, there should be people in the government who have got a better grand plan and push these sort of developments. I'm just at a loss, really, that a community has to drive an economic corridor. That's something that both the state government should want. They should want economic growth. They should want the pie to grow bigger. And then the same with the federal government. They should want the pie to grow bigger, and they should want connectivity between their defence bases on Sugar and the port of Cairns. And why the governments aren't driving this is beyond me. I think it's a real failing. They're too busy out there. We've just had a federal election. They're out there buying votes with, you know, a few bucks here, a few bucks there for garbage projects, rather than big developmental projects that will improve the infrastructure of the nation and the wealth creation of the nation. It doesn't seem to figure in their calculations.
It doesn't seem to make sense to me, because me and many people, because these departments, these local government councils and things, they've got planners, they've got economists, they've got environmental sections, environmental people, they've got industrial development, people promoting industrial development. Then you go to the state government, and then you multiply that by 10. Then you go to the federal government. God knows what you apply, what you multiply it there. There's all these people that are supposed to be out there looking forward. Well, where are they? You know, why? Like you say, why aren't they shouting from the rooftops? Why don't we hear from them?
I also think we've had a lot of talk over the going back to before Abbott, and especially Abbott was pushing for the development of Northern Australia, and there's been white papers and everything. But I mean, there's been almost zero government input to put major infrastructure in Northern Australia to grow the pie. I mean, we had the Northern Australian Infrastructure Fund, which was basically is nothing. It doesn't really. It's just a loan facility for when interest rates were the cheapest ever in the world for companies to get on board to get some government money or a grant or a loan. But loan money was never so cheap when that thing was started, and it certainly hasn't delivered any mind-boggling infrastructure. All it's done is sort of help a few companies sort of get some idea off the ground, and I think we've been done a real disservice in regards to Northern Australia in general, not just Queensland but Northern Territory, West Australia, in the fact that they've failed to develop, and they continue to fail to develop Northern Australia, and it is a blight on the country.
It's not only a blight on the country, Bill, it's going to be an enormous load on the country. If you think about go to all the big cities and what have you, and yes, they provide employment, they feed on themselves, but there's got to be some base load industry there to generate employment. And so we've got all these amazing opportunities right across Northern Australia that have been ignored for all this time, where we can just add water or add a road or add a rail, and all of a sudden the place blossoms and there's employment and there's opportunity for people and for businesses to gain wealth and pay tax, and therefore the government gets more money. There's all these opportunities going begging, and all of those opportunities, there isn't an economist that I know that doesn't support the idea that if you're going to do an income generating type infrastructure facility, and it's going to pay tax and it's going to employ people and what have you, then it doesn't matter how much you borrow at what rate, because you'll get your money back. Society will get that money back eventually. And so, yeah, I had a lot of hope. We were lucky enough to meet Barnaby Joyce, and if you sit down and talk with Barnaby Joyce for long enough, you'll get to know what's in his heart, and you can see that he was all about that regional development. He kept pushing it, and he kept on saying all the reasons why. If you sit down with Mr. Cummings, he will tell you, he will show you. His archives are full of projects that would have generated income, generated prosperity, generated money for hospitals and things, generated jobs for our grandchildren. But unfortunately, we are a little bit in Australia dead in the water.
I think that's the attitude towards all regional growth. I think the governments haven't really got a proper handle on it. I mean, they'll spend $7-8 billion on a cross-river rail that will never ever grow the pie. It will only cut off a few minutes travel time, and it's not an actual investment. It's a liability, right? Yeah. Because you've got to maintain it all the time. You've got to subsidise, and this is what gets you about public transport in these sort of situations. You've got to actually subsidise every fare that uses that facility. So that $8 billion spent in Brisbane on that will never generate a dollar for the nation. But if you've got $8 billion and spend it in Northern Australia to give infrastructure that's better road connectivity, water infrastructure, you'll actually make money from that. It might take a little bit more time than a lot of people think, but it has the potential to do that. Whereas another tunnel in Brisbane is never going to create a new dollar.
Yeah. Bill, I'm sitting in Mareeba tonight. Mareeba is, you know, I call it the Mareeba Plains and the Atherton and Tablelands out in the Gulf and up in the peninsula. Agriculture product just in fruit, not in vegetables, just in fruit, north of Tully, is about to overtake the value of the tourist industry from Tully north. The value of the fruit, not the veggies, not the other stuff, the fruit only is about to overtake it. All you have to do here in Mareeba and Mareeba Plains and further up is just add water. Then the markets are already there. We've got to do some transport links, yes, but the markets are already there. The farmers already have the expertise to do what they have to do. The whole thing is set to go. It just needs a big investment in water, which in a dam pays for itself. How many times has Tinaroo Dam paid for itself over and over and over again? So, you know, you just simply have to do these trigger things, which in the big scheme of things are small. The investments are small in the big scheme, like the Reddicliffe proposal. In the big scheme of things, it's small. And then you trigger a future for our people.
We've just gone over the hour, so we'll wrap it up now. But one thing I would just want to touch on before we go, with the Reddicliffe, because you're going into near Redlands, you've got a reasonable amount of resistance in some parts of the community. How do you think you can engage over time to sort of rest everyone's concern in regards to we don't want it in our backyard type thing?
Yeah, well, you'll always have a little bit of that, but the thing for me is that all the messages from people that I talk to, and I talk to a lot from Redlands, and the message gets conveyed by a lot of people to us, all of us, and that is that when they start to see the big picture of this thing, they change their minds. But where we're going to be able to overcome that is when someone's got the money to then do the design for the overpass over Intake Road. It's got to be up high, like unusually high. It's got to be up unusually high because you need to cross Intake Road, you need to cross the Freshwater Creek floodplain and then cross Freshwater Creek. And then economically for fuel burn, you need to arrive at the foot of Jagool Peak at the mountain there as high as you can. Every metre you gain on the ground is a metre less you have to gain on the hill. So the higher that overpass is, the better it is for all concerned. And also, we want to know if that overpass would survive, if it's possible to design an overpass that would survive a flood from a burst of Copperload Dam. So we don't know that. We don't know. We know what the projected wave heights are and all that sort of stuff, but we don't know what would be involved in building an overpass that would survive that. We don't know what would be involved in on-off ramp for the people of the Upper Valley so that they no longer have to travel down Intake Road. They can get on the Reddicliffe to get to Cairns, to the city, which will be a lot faster. We would hope that that quarry that's got a big extension on its life there would be looking at joining hands on an on-off ramp to put their trucks up on the Reddicliffe rather than go down through Intake Road and through the middle of Redlands. So we need to look at world's best practice, and you can see some of it in sections on that new Townsville bypass road. of soundproofing, sound reduction. And so world's best practice exists mainly in Europe, sometimes in the States, but mainly in Europe. And that's where because we have got some people talking to us from there, and we've got some people in Cairns who are retired motorway builders. So they're always interested in noise, they're in noise reduction. So I think when the time comes when those sorts of investigations are going to be done, and that's where I would really hope that there are community groups who are represented in those investigations to pick out the best. And I think when all that comes to fruition, the thing will be pretty readily accepted.
Okay then, I think we should take some consolation in the success of the Toowoomba connector and what happened down there. And we'd like to see the same sort of benefits arrive in North Queensland and far North Queensland. So Ken, thank you very much for your time tonight. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill.
I'll just wind up now. If you've enjoyed tonight's episode, please like, share and follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Join me again for the next episode. Thank you.